I told them about it. Carol. Carol asked for the link. I'm just saying, a lot of people are.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Rena Kiehn and David Kiehn, and we're here from the SNA, Niles SNA Silent Film Museum to talk with you about Niles in general, as well as the film museum and the film studio that was here over 100 years ago. So David will be chiming in here and talking with you about the various things. We're doing a lot of different things. And right now, this is a slideshow that I had put together originally for the 80th anniversary of the school auditorium for Niles Elementary. So there's a couple of slides that would make sense in that context, but we have redone it so we can show it to you tonight. We're going to start the slideshow again and take it away, David.
So this first one, as it says, is from 1884, where wasn't very much. We did. You can see up in the top left corner is Mission Peak, and down on the bottom of the frame is Harrison Mayhew's property, and just above that is the Niles train depot, and just above that is an orchard where that's about where J Street and 2nd Street is today.
That's the original train depot, the one that got
from
replaced.
the 1870, yeah, 1870 train depot, and its associated outbuildings. The next one is from 1893. Shows how much Niles has progressed since then. The road that was so prominent in the 1884 photograph is way off to the left now, going off towards Mission Peak. But what you see mostly is downtown Niles with a lot of orchards surrounding it. And a number of these buildings still survive in Niles today. There are some prominently missing. The off to the kind of
middle left is the Catholic Church, which is gone now on
got
2nd
replaced.
Street. Yeah. Yeah. But throughout the middle is what was then Front Street, now Niles Boulevard today. And
Is that Corpus Christi Church that got replaced with another church that looks like it?
no, that's the first Catholic church in town.
Okay, but it's the Corpus Christi site.
Yeah, right.
So it got replaced by another
It-
church.
It didn't get, it got removed, and then down the street where the orchard is, the current church is today.
Okay,
In between the orchard and the Corpus, and the Catholic church is where the pastor's house or priest house is today.
okay. If you look at the church, the big church building, and you follow along with your sight line and you see the Victorian that's there in front of all the orchards there with the water tower behind it, that house still survives, and that is on Riverside Avenue. It used to be
and
K
Third
Street. It became K Street. So if you think about it with J, and it would be the next street over. And then of course there's DeSalle
That
and then
was-
L Street. which
That
is-
was the farmhouse that owned all of that orchard land at that time.
The other thing I love about this picture is the train is in mid steam. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, and that's the 1870 train station is kind of behind the two trees that are to the left of that, the steam train. Yes. Yeah. So this is 1915. Things have changed a little bit more. There's more. They were very active by 1915. They came in 12. And even in this photograph, way to the right side, there's the Edison Theater, and in the what's now the parking lot next door is a little carnival going on at the time. They would have an annual carnival in Niles, and you can see the looks like a tent or I'm not quite sure what.
So it's on the very edge of the
Yes,
photograph,
way off to
very
the
edge
right.
on the right side.
And by this time, the 1870 train depot was gone, moved off to I Street. It became the Niles Library for a while, and in the middle of the photograph is where the 1901 train depot is.
And the body of water is Alameda Creek.
That's right. Yeah. Now we're at 1912 Niles, downtown, looking west, and you can see the Oddfellows Hall. It was at the corner of J Street and what's now Niles Boulevard.
And what is that? What's that now?
It was replaced by a newer Oddfellows Hall made out of brick in 1929. The two buildings right next to it are still there. So is the brick building that is 2 stories in the photograph, but around 1940, that building was unstable, and so they took off the top floor of the building. So all that remains is the bottom floor, where the El Camino Saloon is, and Lost in the Attic today is there.
So where the bell is, the bell telephone sign, is that where Corey Glass was, right here on the edge here? Was that where Corey Glass is
No,
now in Ambrose?
that was the Oddfellows Hall that's gone and replaced by the brick building Oddfellows.
Oh, got it. Okay. So the Macau Cultural Center now.
Yes.
This could have been early in the morning.
There were a few cars in town by this time. First one, I think, was owned by William Schneider, who owned a general store in town. He got that car in 1905. I think his was the first car. Way down the street,
Hi, this
off
is
to the
Paul.
left is a big 2-story building that was the Township registered newspaper office.
This is Paul Sethi. I think I can hear Rena very clearly, but Mr. Kiehn, you sound very hollow on what you're saying and echoing.
David
back.
actually talks kind of hollow, so he'll do his best. He's got
So,
the microphone right to his mouth.
Yeah, so speak
Don't
clearly
think I can
into the
get it any
microphone.
closer.
I think we'll be much better off. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
Does this sound any better to me?
Yes, yes.
Go.
So now we're way over in 1948, downtown Niles. You can see the Niles Theater right in the center of the picture. That building burnt down in 1959, and behind that, yeah, the Florence is still there. The old Edison Theater is obscured by the Niles Theater sign.
So let me say that to clarify. So the building here that has Niles marquee had that blade marquee, that is no longer here. The building behind it is where our museum is currently, which had turned into a warehouse at that point. And the Florence was an Italian restaurant, not a bar at that point.
Just one of the many bridges that came and went through Niles over the years. Ward Bridge. Gone now. The foundations for it are still there. It was at the end of Niles Canyon Road that the original Niles Canyon Road.
And here we go. Now we're going to start talking about the film museum or the film studio that was here from 1912 to 1916. And by 1913, this building was in place. There had been a barn that had been rented and a tent that had been constructed in front of it. And of course, we are fortunate that the Museum of Local History has given us the barn door that we have on display at our museum now, which we greatly appreciate. So this is what replaced it. And this was a $52,000 building. It looks like a brick building, but in fact, it's pressed steel. So it's a bit like a drafty garage. That's the easiest way I could describe it. Okay, well, why don't you go back and we'll point out what these bungalows. So if you look in the behind the studio, you see the glass enclosed stage there, which will show another angle from it, right behind the Indian head. And then to the left, you'll see the houses. And those houses all still survive. 2 of them are on School Street, but the rest are all still on 2nd Street, but they have been spread out. They were on one long plot line, and now they are individual house plots. And David will add any information that he thinks is important. So this is where they are. So that yellow house is was where Raleigh Tothrow lived with his wife and the child, Jack. And Raleigh became Charlie Chaplin's cameraman. Not while he was in Niles. So Raleigh starts out as a baseball player. Bronco Billy Anderson, the first cowboy movie star, loves baseball as much as he loves making movies. He hires Raleigh to be his third baseman and says, oh, in the spare time, you can work making movies with us. So he ended up becoming a cinematographer. When Chaplin went to Los Angeles and stayed there, Raleigh got hired by him and was with him for 38 years. It's probably one of the longest lasting relationships in movie history.
So these bungalows were, the first 6 were built in 1912, and then 4 more were built in 1913 for a total of 10. And he was financed by Bronco Billy Anderson himself. And they were rented out to cast and crew members for $25 a month.
Okay, so here we have pictures of the interiors. So that glass front, can you go back to the studio building? I can look again. Okay, so see behind the Indian head, there's the glass enclosed stage. You can see the top part of it. So now we're going to go and you're going to see what it looks like. So
Inside.
the inside. So the left side obviously is where you can see the set has been set up for a movie called The Champion. And it's hard to see in this particular image, but
We'll go to a better one later.
Yeah, so Charlie's going through the archway. But we see one of the scenes that he made in an interior set there was called A Night Out. So the nice thing about The Champion is it was filmed all in Niles proper. So there's several places that we're going to be able to tell you about that you can walk to today and see. So the most obvious one was where the fire station is now. That was the corner of the studio. And as you walk along G Street, you can see the fence for the fire station. And that's actually where the wooden fence had been for the movie, The Champion. And there's a more obvious angle. These images are all from John Bankston, who is an amazing silent film locations guru of ours. He puts together all kinds of programs. So he's loaned us some photographs for us to share with you. So one of the images in the movie, The Champion, is where Charlie opens the gate and David can tell you what he sees outside that door, that gate.
You can, through the opening on the left of the opening is the Township Register newspaper office. And just past that, just to the right of that building, is the Southern Pacific Freight Building. There's a better view of the Township Register on the right section of this photograph that shows the name of the building. And a little sharper image that was shot. You'll see a better image of that whole frame later on. of the Township Register building in the middle there, and our movie theater to the right on that same street.
So here's another angle from the same part of the film. So Charlie opens up, and what do you see behind Charlie but those squares? And that is the actual back of the glass enclosed stage. And you can see the angle of where it was at from behind the studio building. And now you can see the fire station now and the then. This is actually from about 1928. It was years after the studio was closed, but you got to see what it was like. But you know, the building survived for many years after the group left. They left in 1916, and there was plans over the years of other companies coming in, but things never ended up working out. And unfortunately, by the time a group was going to take it over, potentially, sound came to films, and you cannot make movies when you're 50 feet away from the trains. So it ended up getting torn down in 1933. So this is a fun angle. And this is what I always tell people.
It was torn down.
I was,
It was owned by Ed Rose, and his brother Fat Rose tore it down in 1933, in July of 1933. The theater, the theater burned down in 1959. That may be where the confusion lies.
no, and actually just a few years ago when the office at the Hinkle building was burning, they were saying it was the SNA studio building was burning. So that was just a few years ago. So a lot of people, I guess, fire, I mean, yeah, but it makes sense though, that because there was a major fire, and you know, that fire, that theater burned down in 1959, and the embers stayed until 1968, until Al Lopez Sr. took it all away, hauled it away when the ruins.
Stayed,
so I'm just saying is well, okay. the ruins of the embers. I'm just saying is that there was residue from the fire for 8 long years until he took it all away. So I can imagine a lot of people saying that, oh, well, yeah, the fire took place. Well, you start losing track of exactly what happened. But what we can see here, this is one of the most famous scenes of the film. And if you watch, you can watch it on YouTube. Just go to the Champion, Charlie Chaplin, it'll come up. But it's fun though, and people loved it when they know this. They can stand on the corner of where the fire station is, that very corner part. That's the exact location where Charlie ends up. Well, he doesn't mean to, but he ends up bopping a cop, and then he ends up going under, punching him and then going under his legs. And he goes running down the street or the sidewalk there. And at the very end, you can see it in the background. That's actually Sullivan's Field. And David can tell you more about that.
It's the baseball field that.
Got to mark the sidewalk where that happened.
Yeah, it'd be nice. And you can see behind Charlie the studio building, and it looks like brick, but it's pressed steel sheets. That's the studio, yeah. And in the middle there, you can see kind of a ramp going up to the middle of the building. There were horseshoe prints impressed into the cement ramp, and that was the last part of the studio building that survived, I think, into the 1950s or so. That was the last piece after the studio was torn down to survive. For some reason, they kept that for a while before tearing that out as well.
Maybe it was their Grauman Chinese footprints kind of a thing.
So you can see in the distance highlighted is the baseball grandstand.
And that's where Raleigh Tothero ended up playing baseball.
And here is the field itself in 1915. And off to the left is the grandstand that you saw in the previous photograph. Ben Turpin is there in the middle of the photograph for this film. That this is a frame from the film that survives.
It's called Snakeville's Champion. So it was kind of, another boxing kind of person, except this time he's wrestling. And he's a scrawny guy with cross eyes. And he's, I guess, dealing with that. You might think he's a one joke performance because of his cross eyes being the comic bit, but it worked in a variety of avenues. He also lived next door to Raleigh Tothero, he and his wife. They were very popular in Niles.
Down in the bottom left corner is the Niles baseball team that was financed by Bronco Billy Anderson, and this was in their winning days when they were one of the top teams in the area.
They started out really stinking on ice, and Anderson
Bronco Billy came.
And then Anderson thought he made a studio team. He started getting ringers to play, and they suddenly got much better, surprisingly. And the gentleman in the uniform at the front, that's an Indian head, which is the SNA logo. It's hard to see in that image, but that's what it is.
Yeah, by this time, and that photograph I think was taken in 1915. It was the team was called the SNA Indians.
So now we could look at to the right. You all recognize obviously the depot that has been moved and turned around. So we all get to see the pretty side, the side that normally would be where you'd get on and off the train. But when the city put together the plaza, they realized the attractive side was that side. So they turned it around. But anyway, you can see where Edna is, Edna Proviance. She's 19 years old, and she is in the film The Champion. She's playing the manager, the fight manager's daughter. So she's not needing to be, a voluptuous gal. She's wearing this thick sweater. But where she's standing, you can see the freight building right behind her. And then there's the freight building in the picture. Same building, same location.
Not the same location.
Oh.
The building was moved to the front of the property, I think in the 1890s or so, and it stayed there until the plaza was built.
They put it back the wrong way.
Well, actually, they put it back where it was originally, inadvertently.
Towards the passengers should be.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the freight building that's the freight building that was, yeah.
We know.
The freight building was for a while
Near Niles Boulevard, and the photograph with Edna shows the freight building in the background. And on the other side of the tree, it looks like that is the SNA studio building in the distance. There's a better quality photograph of the SNA glass enclosed stage here.
the chaplain doing a scene from The Champion in the middle there.
And you see the name Dealey in the lower left corner. Tell them about that guy.
That was Charles Allen Dealey, who was the studio photographer. And I met his granddaughter, and that's where this photograph came from. She had 2 photo albums of photographs that her grandfather took of when he was working for the SNA company in Niles.
And you can see Edna, her back to the camera, off on the right side. And there's a lady right next to her wearing a hat. She's turning towards us. And then there's a gentleman who's a large gentleman. And we know those to be Fatty Arbuckle, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, and Mabel Normand. Now, they never made a movie here. They did make a movie about Fatty and Mabel in the World's Fair in San Francisco. And they came up to visit their friend, Charlie Chaplin, because he had worked with them at the Keystone Studio the year before he came to Niles.
Here is the glass enclosed stage looking in the other direction. See what the back of it looks like. It was I think about 75 feet by 65 feet.
Fairly large stage.
That looks much bigger
Yeah.
here. I mean, look, if you look at the people,
Yeah.
looks like it's 4 times that amount.
Well, the height of it looks like it's about 25 or 30 feet.
I always hoped that they would replicate this in the town plaza. So use it for events.
Mm.
I have a question to ask. Is Mr. Dealey related to Dealey Plaza in Dallas, where President.
No, we don't believe that there's any relation to Dealey Plaza.
Oh, it's the anniversary of President Kennedy's death today, so I was wondering.
Well, we don't believe there's a connection there. Yes, it is a tough day.
This is a side view taken from the top of the Edison Theater building. You can see there was no buildings in between where our theater building and the studio was in 1915. It's all open land. You can see this side of the glass enclosed stage and the bungalows and beyond to California nursery land.
The alleys were there.
Yeah, right there.
The alleys of Niles. Oh boy, that's a whole nother conversation.
And looking in the other direction, our theater building in 1913, and the across the street is the Township Register newspaper office.
So we have a cameo appearance of the Edison Theater. If you go back, David, just go back one more. Okay, so look at the building that you see in the well, what is
Look
that?
at the top of the Edison Theater building.
Yep, and then you can see it
off to
peeking
the
out.
left, over the fence line, is the top of the Edison Theater building.
So it's kind of fun to know that there's one of our buildings that is still there. In fact, extremely important for us is peeking out of a Charlie Chaplin film. So
The fences are taller than 6 feet.
Yeah.
A waiver from the city.
So here's the same image, the same angle, I should say, or a different angle, but it's the same building.
Today.
David's looking at me funny. So this was the last film that he made in Niles before he went off to Los Angeles. And the reason why is because Niles was a small town and he wanted to go to a bigger city. Los Angeles wasn't necessarily, or Hollywood wasn't necessarily huge, but it certainly was bigger than Niles. He did like San Francisco, but he made this film and then he asked Bronco Billy Anderson, the very first cowboy movie star, the A of S&A, who was his boss, asked him if he would just rent him a studio down in Los Angeles to work on his contract there. So this is a significant scene because at the end of the film, he walks away from the camera going into the canyon. So the scene on the right side is the opening scene and the scene on the left side is the closing scene. And it's one of the most famous images of all cinematic history. And it's exactly 1.8 miles from the base of Mission Boulevard. And you drive into the canyon, set your odometer for 1.8 and you'll get there. And we try to tell everybody, do not get out of your car and try to walk it unless they're having the stroll and roll where they close off those 6 miles of Niles Canyon.
This shows a couple of other films that were made in that area.
I think just about every S&A film, there was some scene or two shot in Niles Canyon. That's the reason why they came to Niles in the first place. And it shows in this photograph markers that show it's the same location for 3 different films.
That's that same 1.8 miles in. For whatever reason, that just had the most picturesque view, I guess. And it's still there. It's just a matter of the roads paved, but otherwise it really actually looks the same. And that's why we like to stop at those strolls and rolls and stand there with our pictures and our hats and canes and people can take selfies. I don't know if I think there's going to be another one coming up, hopefully this next year. There was supposed to be one this year, but I think they pushed it off till next year. So here's, okay, I'm going to tell a really funny story because I said to David, you're going to figure out where this scene is from. I mean, the joke of the story here is he's got this little tiny watering can. He's got all these big trees. And I said to him, oh, you'll figure it out. You'll figure out where. He said, Rena, all of Niles was an orchard and those trees are long gone. I said, you know what? You're going to figure this out. And he did. It was because of this image. So we mentioned John Bankston, locations expert. He's been able to go through Blu-rays, and Blu-ray a lot of times actually has crisper detail than even a film print might, because of the way that it's set up. So he's able to take frame grabs. So he took this frame grab and he said, Rena, there's a building behind the farmhand in Charlie Chaplin. And look, there's 5 pillars. And I said, I don't know what that is. And David said, I think I've seen this before. There's a close-up. Well, and it's fuzzy, but so here's the story. So E.E. Diaz was a general contractor in Niles from the mid 1920s to 1959, right after Niles became part of Fremont. He moved 25 buildings around town, and he's at least up till a few years ago, you could see his name stamped on the sidewalks on 2nd Street and other places. When they started putting the corners, the new corners, some of the names got his name, most of his stamps got obscured.
Removed.
Okay, well, so, and David befriended his granddaughter who gave him his blueprints, his photographs, and all kinds of other things. Now, the interesting thing about the timing of it was this is about the time when people started taking more pictures. You know, the cameras were more of a normal thing. And he took a picture of everything before he demolished it. So
He also, when he was moving buildings, he took pictures of the buildings on rollers, showing that they were being moved around as well. And he built a number of structures in Niles from the ground up as well. So we took construction photographs of houses in Niles as well.
So, but the chances of people seeing this image before. So David recognized that the 5 pillars, and he showed it to me, and I said, "Son of a gun, I can't believe that." And then he said,
"Those aren't the same 5 pillars. There were pillars at the end of the building as well, which is not in this photograph, but it was just so that cars wouldn't be able to drive onto the property and potentially hit a student or something like that."
Sounds like a good idea. So you see that building, you see the picture, you can see how there's a slope shaped roof, and then the building itself has a slope shaped roof. So David likes to double down, and this is not good enough proof. He needs to have more proof. So
I don't think
you don't think you didn't include?
No.
So let me tell you, there's a thing called the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company, and they were the Google Maps of the day. People would come to any small town as well as large cities and draw every single structure in those places. And every 10 to 15 years, the company would have people come back again. So there are several versions. What versions do they have of
The
Niles?
first version in Niles is 1892. Then they did one for 1898, then 1907, 1920, 1929, and 1944.
So David was able to compare the 1929 one, which had the smaller building, school building. It still had the studio building there. It had also the orchard that was right across from the school. And then when he looked at the 1944 one, the school building had been enlarged because the new auditorium, which is still
The
there.
whole building was replaced.
Okay.
The whole thing was replaced.
And there was now E Street. There hadn't been E Street before, and there was no orchard anymore, and the Veterans Hall had been put in place. So basically, if you stand on 2nd Street on the ramp of the Veterans Hall, and you're looking out at the school, you're in approximately the place where Charlie made the movies, at least as close as you can be with seeing.
Yeah. Otherwise, you really have to step inside the building to be where the orchard was, where he was standing.
And then it's not quite as exciting.
This is Paul Sethi. I just want to interrupt here for a second. It's a wonderful presentation. I'm reminded that I wrote in an article for the Tri-City Voice that
There were some.
Joseph
Just didn't mark
Shin,
them.
Is there a question, Tim?
Joseph Shin donated.
Paul, can you hear Paul at all over there?
We could earlier, but now we can't. Go ahead.
The fan is on, so.
The fan's on, so.
Oh,
Oh, I was just offering the information that I have written before in the Tri-City Voice that the Joseph Shin donated the land for the school and for the Veterans Hall down there in Niles.
Joseph Shin donated the land for the Veterans Hall, is that what you're saying?
Hey, Paul, have Paul say it again. Ask him to say
Paul,
it again.
can you say that again, please?
Yes, I have written before about the history of the Shin family in the Tri-City Voice and the fact that Joseph Shin donated the land for the elementary school as well as the Veterans Hall right across the street.
David corroborates. So now we're going back to the our theater building. As you can see, there's a picture of Charlie Chaplin in the middle without his mustache. That was actually glued on, folks. People don't realize that. He also had to dye his hair pretty early on. In the mid-20s, he had already gone silver and gray, and he had to start dyeing his hair to make it himself look the way he had just a few years earlier. To the left is Edna Purviance, his leading lady in 37 films, and they were a couple for a while. And then we believe they're just some passerbys, not necessarily. They were waiting for the next train, so they snapped a picture with Charlie. And we can see it, this is kind of a then and now. So you can see the middle part is sepia, and then around the edges is the current day.
The old house in the background is still there. And you can see the original front to the theater building, which has been changed now and looks a little different today. We hope to turn it back to the way it was 100 years ago. This is a architectural sketch of what the building should look like today when we get it remodeled.
So this is what we hope the inside will look like, giving it a bit of a arts and crafts, Art Deco, appropriate time period artwork. And then we also have the sconces that we have actually gotten from the Grauman's Imperial in San Francisco. The Grauman's Imperial Theater, sorry. Grauman's Imperial Theater that was on Market Street, I believe 1075 Market Street. If you walk,
torn down a few years ago, and these were salvaged from it.
but if you actually go, if you walk by that building and you look inside, it's now like apartments, but you will see a yellow Grauman's Imperial stained glass window that is backlit. It's quite lovely. And that's where the theater had been. And we actually have the sconces from that theater that we hope to put in place, as well as our plan is to put at the very edge, you can see the molding. We'd have some plaster molding that'll be painted appropriately at the top. And anyway, this is part of what the look would be when we get all done with our project. And we're only $2 million shy for making that happen. So some of the things we do, we have a Charlie Chaplin Days the last weekend in June. And one of the highlights is always the lookalike contest. We've had it online the last 2 years. Yes, we want to be in person if we possibly can be for next year. We will have some special guests from far away, if that's able to happen, that are very involved with Charlie Chaplin's legacy. And this is our SNA logo. So SNA stands for George Spohr and Gilbert Bronco Billy Anderson. Spohr was the money man. He was in Chicago. And Anderson, he came by way of New York. He was actually in a movie, The Great Train Robbery in 1903. He played 3 parts, would have played a 4th part, but he kind of fibbed when they asked him if he could ride a horse. He said, why, sure, I was born on a horse. And he got on the wrong side and got bucked off. And they said, but you said you were born on a horse. He said, well, not that horse. So he played a bad guy who hits the station master on the head. He's wearing a bandana. He also plays a Guy runs away from the train robbers at the train tracks and gets shot in the back, and he has a big dramatic fall. He also plays a city slicker who goes into the saloon where the soon-to-be posse shoot at his feet and make him dance a jig. He saw the audience reaction to this film. It was an extremely important film done by the Edison Company. Edwin S. Porter was the director. He saw the audience reaction and he said, that's it. Life for me in pictures, it has no end. Because he realized that this film was playing in the rich parts of town, the poor parts of town. Everybody loved the film. It was originally meant to be a chaser, where to chase people out of the vaudeville theater, but they kept saying, run it again, run it again. So that got him. That was not his first film. He was in a few other films, but it certainly was one that launched him into realizing that motion pictures were the future.
A good career move.
Yes. Now, something that's special about Bronco Billy Anderson is he did get an Oscar in 1958, 10 years after Spoor got his, along with a bunch of other people who started the film industry, essentially. And when he got it in 1958, it was a very big deal for him, gave him a bit of a renaissance. His last film, after not being in films for decades, was in 1965. He played a tiny part in the film called The Bounty Killer. And he's an old man, which was appropriate, in a saloon, just in a short scene. But that film had a lot of, let's just say, life experienced movie cowboys. And we actually have that Oscar. We have Bronco Billy's Oscar. We don't have it on site. We don't bring it out all the time. So it's off site until we bring it in. But it is definitely what we would call a holy grail for us to have. And we are thrilled. And that came through us through happenstance and friendships and people wanting to see us succeed.
Spelling of the name, what part is Anderson and what part is the?
Okay, well, actually, so Gilbert Anderson was born Max Aronson, and he decided to change his name to George Anderson, a show business name sounding more, I guess, American or whatever you want to call it. And then when he got partnered up with George Spoor, he changed it from George. He changed it to Gilbert M. Anderson. Middle name was Max. So that's why he's the A of S&A. So S&A, E-S-S-A-N-A-Y, is actually a phonetic spelling of the letters S and A, like C&H, pure cane sugar, it's S&A. So so that's the reason for that spelling. And Spoor is S-P-O-O-R. And he's a very important person as well. We just don't tell his story as much because he wasn't based in Niles at all. I don't know if he ever came out to California.
He came out to California in 1912 to talk to Anderson about building the studio.
Okay.
And approved it, and it went from there.
But did he come back again?
No, he didn't.
Okay. He came one time, but that makes sense. I mean, you got to see what you got to see.
Studio manager in Chicago came back after the studio closed so that S&A could arrange to sell the buildings. So
this main thing is that the movies came to Niles in 1912. They ended at the beginning of 1916. They're a very important company, and they actually made more movies in the Bay Area than any of the other film studios, even to this day, combined.
And they were the most successful silent studio in the Bay Area as well. They made a lot of money. They were very profitable.
But we're not going to say that they, when people say, oh, was Niles the original Hollywood? No, it wasn't. It was on par with Hollywood. Hollywood was happening at the time. It just happened to be, but in and of itself, it was very important to have the very first cowboy movie star, to have an extremely important studio, to have Charlie Chaplin, who had been making films the year before for the Keystone Studio. He shot to superstardom. It started a fad called Chaplinitis because of what he did in Niles. So we've got plenty of things to hang our hat on and be very proud of. And so that was a studio. So what happened for the film museum is David was walking down the street in Niles before all the improvements, and it was narrow sidewalks, and I'm picturing newspapers flying, like tumbleweeds through the streets and such. And he saw the bones of the town.
Yeah, I came here in 1995, and and happened to arrive for one of the Chaplain Days events when um, they were having Elvis impersonators and
Hula dancers.
hula dancers and bed races.
It was put on by the Merchants Association, and there weren't a lot of other events in the time. So this was kind of it was a whole potpourri of activity there, and didn't have as much to do with Charlie as it once had. But I mean, they were showing grainy VHS tapes in the
They were
train cars and things
they
like that.
tried to show it in the train car, and the player wouldn't work, and so they took the tapes over to Bronco Billy's Pizza Parlor and played it on the TV screens there that day.
And then then that actually, but that was the impetus. So then people got wind.
I just I came to do research in Niles to see what it looked like after all these years, knowing for years that the SNA studio had been here, and I thought it might be an interesting screenplay to write. But after I saw Niles and was so impressed by the town, I decided if I could find enough information that it really deserved to be a book. And so I started looking for information, going through hundreds of reels of microfilm, going to various libraries all around the Bay Area and even all around the country as well, Denver, Colorado, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress, and gathering information. And then in 1997, I started doing slideshow presentations to service groups like the Lions Club in Kiwanis and historical societies, and did one for the Niles Main Street Association,
Which was newly formed at that time.
I think it was about a year old at that point. And a couple of people were impressed by the number of photographs that I'd already managed to gather. I had started, I couldn't find very good photographs in the libraries and other places that I went to. So I started tracking down relatives of cast and crew people.
Yeah, tell them how you did that.
I found about 50 different relatives of cast and crew people by going through obituaries, finding out who their relatives were, going through phone books. And a friend of mine would make phone calls to the people that I thought they were the relatives, and contacted them. And then I would go to their house and take copy photographs of all the photographs they had. In some cases, they actually gave me the photographs after I was able to identify the people in the photographs that they didn't even know who they were.
But some of these people didn't even know their own family were part of the film industry.
Well, in the community, and from time to time, they would talk about the SNA Day. And I would listen to the old timers. These are like my grandmas, which my grandmother lived in South Florida High School. And they thought something, and I want to know if you ever heard it. The movie stars didn't like Niles, and one of the reasons they left it was because movie stars like to party, like today, you know, they're kind of party people, and they didn't like Niles because they had to go all the way to Oakland at nighttime after they worked to party. Did you ever hear that?
No, I didn't ever hear that.
Places you can party, dance halls.
Niles was certainly a small town, but there were 8 saloons in Niles when SNA was in town, and only 3 churches.
They also talked about how many hours they had to work on the movie studios. So, I'm just asked this question. I go, well, how could they go to, they didn't have any freeways or anything. How can they go work all day, all these hours, and go all the way to Oakland and party and come back and go to work the next morning. So that's what
The great thing about Niles was it was a railroad hub. And so all the trains from North Oakland and beyond
there you go.
went through Niles and down to San Jose.
That would answer the
Yeah.
question.
So if you wanted to go to San Jose, you'd take the railroad. If you wanted to go to Oakland, you'd take the railroad.
How many nights did Charlie Chaplin actually spend in
He was only in Niles for 2.5 months, and he and Anderson would often go to San Francisco. Anderson had first a Thomas Fire automobile, which cost $6,000 in 1908, and then later a Simplex automobile that cost about the same amount, and that he bought in 1912. And they would drive to San Francisco, take the ferry across the bay, and Anderson had a suite at the St. Francis Hotel that he stayed at when he wasn't in Niles. So
Well,
I think so, yeah. And, he liked the big city. He shot 2 films in the park and a jitney elopement in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park and around the area.
as part of his Niles
Yeah.
film.
And also went to the World's Fair in 1915 that was going on that same time.
So David ended up getting the, while he was working on this book, what ends up happening is they say we should put on a film festival. And so the Niles SNA Preservation Committee was formed as part of the Main Street Association. And that happened for a couple of years there, 2-3 years. And then the group decided that they should break off into their own 501c3 and with no bricks and mortar aspect, just film festivals. And that's what happened in 2001. So we were just celebrating our 20th anniversary as a nonprofit. And it seems like a lot longer in some ways. Anyway, in 2004, at the end of 2004, there was a rumor going around that the photography studio that had been the original Edison Theater or Bell Theater was going to become available. And our group looked at each other and said, "Are you in?" We each looked at each and said, "Yeah." And what that meant was we were going to be dedicating our lives, especially our Saturday nights, to showing films every single week, which we did for 15 years until the pandemic shut us down. We hope to go back to screening silent films with live piano in the next few months. Laurel and Hardy and Little Rascals Talkies on the second Sunday of the month. It's been really important, and it just really put a real damper on things, as you can imagine, when we're having this living, breathing entity, this building still saying what was being said, more than 100 years ago, and it fell silent, so to speak. And then we opened back up as a museum in June of 2021. And our store and our museum are open. And like I said, we're hoping to show our films again, but we became our own nonprofit, but it was through only good luck and a lot of people really caring about us. I always said that we were a faith-based organization. You just had to have faith that people were going to help us out, and people would write checks for amazing amounts of money to help pay for rent. We had awesome landlords.
Lopez family has been very generous to us.
And well, the most generous thing they could possibly have done was to give us the building. And Vicki Lopez put it in her will, her trust, to give us the building upon her passing. She passed in late 2019. We ended up getting the keys to the building essentially in February of 2020, and then the pandemic shut us down. So here's where we're at now. And have you ever heard the story, if you give a mouse a cookie? It starts out with, if you give a mouse a cookie, he'll want a glass of milk. And that's what happened. The first couple months with this pandemic, we thought it was just going to be around for a short time. Remember that? It was going to be a short time? Yeah. So we decided we were going to replaster the theater and had drywall that had been put in place in 1989. Well, all that got pulled down with the idea that we're going to replaster. That's all we were going to do. Well, then one of our former board members said, you know what we should really do? We should get architectural plans done, 3D rendering, 3D imaging. This is going to be great. We should find out really what we need to do to make this place, fixed up. And he wasn't wrong. It just was one of those things where we we're like, okay. So let's just say a few bucks later, we now have a rendering of the building. We have what we need to do, which is to raise $2 million. We are hiring, or we've hired a half-time executive director just in the last week. And we are hiring a part-time capital campaign consultant. And hopefully the two of them are going to help us drum up the big donors. We are also needing to raise money just to keep things going, just to pay our light bill and such. So we have had really amazing success, but we also do need support. We are applying for grants, everything we possibly can. Once we get that, so the first $1 million will help put us, and that was in the brochure, in the flyer for the Historical Society newsletter. It gives you more information about that. But the first $1 million will help us to put a foundation in the building, as well as the plumbing and the electrical redone. And also, I believe that's where the restrooms get refurbished and some other things happen. So that's the first $1 million. And then the next $1 million will add all the extra flourishes. What else do you have to say about that, David? Oh, I'm saying it all, huh? Well, as you can imagine, I'm the publicity, press relations, and promotions person. So I have a tendency to talk a lot. And David's the man with the goods, but I'm the good parrot, so I can repeat information pretty well. So do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm not seeing any questions at all online.
Okay. Any questions for any of you?
Very good. I sure appreciate your speech here.
I just wish we had a better turnout. I was very disappointed because I asked a lot of people.
Well-
I really like this organization. and I don't know what's going on.
Well, it's Thanksgiving week. Okay, so that's number one.
That's
That's
number one.
that's a tough one. And then also on top of that, because of the miracle of Zoom, people can watch us at a later time. So
Oh,
we're
okay,
we're
that's
not
fine.
we're not worried.
And
we're not worried at all.
still important.
Understandably. So we've got a trifecta going on here. The main thing is it's been recorded, and if people have questions, they know how to reach us. They can always send an email to historian@nilesfilmmuseum.org. That's David's email, or pr@nilesfilmmuseum.org. That's mine. What I'd like to put in as a plug for free films and videos, in case people didn't know, we do have a YouTube channel, but I would actually suggest people go to our main website, which is www.nilesfilmmuseum.org. Click on this month's program, take a look at it, and then scroll down and you'll see programs from all these other months. And there's lots and lots of themes. And we've got an earthquake show about San Francisco earthquakes. We have programs with Reginald Denny and boxing in the big city. We've got film companies. In fact, you can even see a great train robbery location that David was able to find using Google Earth. And we went and visited it in Paterson, New Jersey. So there's just all these different videos that you're able to see. But the reason why I suggest you go to the website is everything's in context. And there's some things that are on the individual monthly schedules that aren't in the YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel, everything's there, but or not everything's there, and it's out of context to the program. But I'm telling you, that's hours and hours of enjoyment. We've been doing online programming since June of 2020. And we hope that we start shrinking it down and doing less, because we'll be able to do more programs in person.
The great thing about that, though, is that people from around the world have seen things that they wouldn't have been able to see at our theater, not being able to get there. And so, there were 30,000 views last year, 37,000 views so far this year. So a lot of people have taken a look to see what we've done.
Yeah, it was a little confusing to our membership chair, who was saying, how come we have members now in New York and Texas? That's strange. It's like, well, because people are literally seeing us around the world. And yeah, to have 37 views. So there's anywhere from 2 to 10 programs per month. And all those programs have had that many views. So the idea, little old Niles being seen worldwide is pretty darn exciting. And we thank you all very much for coming. And I think we'll be ringing off. And when's your next meeting?
Every 2 months.
Every 2 months. Okay, so
Hi,
come back in January.
hi, this is Paul Sethi. Can you hear me?
You hear Paul?
Yes, David and Rena, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation here. I grew up here in Fremont and have loved Niles since my childhood. And I will express to you my sincere apology that I don't think we did a good enough job to promote this evening's presentation. Normally we have 25 to 40 people between membership at the museum and on Zoom. And so I'm looking forward to representing this and more broadly distributing your presentation through our various Facebook and web forums and everything else. And I'm very excited about the fundraising opportunity for all of us in the community to help out. And so I will work with John Weed, our president, myself as vice president, to see if we can represent this and better publicize and promote the opportunity to support the Niles Silent Film Museum. And Rena, I know you and David know a couple of my close friends that have drifted away over the years, but I have tried to help out at the museum as best I have been able to over the years. So appreciate your presentation. And the friends I'm remembering are Nydia and Ed that were very active in the museum. I'm sure you remember them. And we were very close. So thank you so much for what you have offered the community here.